Hello, my name is Dejan Bojkov, Grandmaster from Bulgaria. In this clip, we are going to have a look at the typical situation in which one of the sides is castling short and the other side is castling long. The situation in which we have castlings in the opposite directions. This is quite very common thing if you do it in the Sicilian defense, and pretty much in every other opening this can happen. If you're looking for trouble or if you're looking for glory, you will come to this moment in which you will be having this opposite castlings attacks. Then the first and the main question that you need to ask yourself and to answer yourself is who is faster? That's the key question. The one who is faster has the pleasure of opening the files against the opponent's king first and then reaching the opponent's king first. He is the first one to start giving checks and the first one to deliver checkmate. One tempo can be crucial. These are the important things that you need to remember when you're attacking on the opposite sides. The game that I chose for you is the game Wei against David Navarra, played from the Tata Steel Chess Tournaments 2016. It started quite modestly with e4, e5, knight of 3, knight c6, bishop b5, and knight f6, the Berlin defense. So people are usually not very accustomed to seeing checkmates and opposite castlings in this opening. In fact, they very often see the queens disappear very, very early. But with the anti-burden that Wei chosen in that game, things got a little bit more exciting. I'm skipping quickly the opening part of this game, because these moves have been seen very, very often. I just want to mention that after queen e2, white shows already his intentions of not castling short. If he wanted to castle short, he could have done it immediately. But he keeps the king in the middle, and with the move bishop d2, now he wants to castle on either side, on the long side or on the short side. It's quite a flexible situation. Well, after bishop d6, which is typical plan for black, he wants to play c5, knight to b8, knight to c6, and to occupy the important outpost on d4. Wei uncorked a novelty, h4. Now he is clearly showing his intentions to attack on the king side and to try and to reach this king as fast as possible. He is getting ready for this. He wants to be the first one to start opening the files, like I told you at the beginning, and he starts his attack even before he castles. He can do that, he can afford doing this because the center is quite stable, and if the center wasn't stable, you shouldn't attack on any of the flanks. This is an important thing for you to remember, because your opponent can break open the center and try to capture a king in the middle. But if the center is stable, then you can start the attack. Okay, so far I just want to mention that white has tried another way of attacking in this situation, g4, but on g4, knight f8, knight e3, and knight e6, knight f5, e5, it was Vichy Anand with the white pieces against Anish Giri, who didn't get much out of the opening because Anish Giri prepared a warm meeting of this king on the queen side. That's why he advanced the pawn. He wants to open as many files and to create counterplay before his opponent actually starts the attack on the king side. But Wei's idea is somewhat different. Okay, David Navarra continued with c5, which is something that you would expect in this situation. I want to mention that the move knight f6 was also a possibility, but the knight alone, even with the help of the bishop, can hardly stop white's pawns. This knight can step back, for example, on h2, and after that g4 and g5 is going to come with tempos, and this is the reason why black probably decided not to go for this one. On the other hand, knight f8 was a possibility, and here we see one of the ideas behind the early advance of the h-pawn. The g6 square has been taken away from this knight. Anyway, this knight can go after that to e6 and to f4 or to d4 still. So this might be the critical test of the whole line, and maybe we're going to see something of that in the future. But obviously Navarro decided that he has plenty of time to bring his knight in the center, and that the attack of the opponent is not dangerous. And on h5, he tried to block this pawn with the move h6. To be honest with you, I don't really like this move, as it creates a typical weakening on the side where black is weaker, on the side where he is going to get under attack. It is called a hook, and a hook is a nice thing for you to have when you're attacking the opponent's king. Why a hook? Because now anytime the pawn comes on g4 and on g5, black would be forced to capture, or he just has to stay there, and white is going to capture. In either case, white is going to open a file for his rook, either the h file or the g file. And therefore, a hook is a very good thing for you to have for your attack in the future. Now, g4 immediately was already an option for white, trying to open a file as quick as possible. And I believe that this would have been quite unpleasant for black if this had happened in the game. And here's the result of the hook. White has opened the file for the rook, and now he can attack. He has concrete threat of playing h6 or even bishop h6 in this situation. Or he can also castle and try and double the rooks and to attack on the g file. Sometimes he can also bring the queen for that. But the way that Wei Yi played with long castle was good enough too. He wants to finish the development, he wants to have this rook ready for the king side attack and to have as many pieces as he would need on the king side, the more the better. Navarro continued with knight to b8, and now Wei kept on mounting pressure on the king side. This is the final preparation before he advances the g pawn. By the way, I just want to mention that if you're having attack on the opposite wings, it makes sense for you very often to even sacrifice a pawn. A pawn is a very small price for an open file. For example, here, after g4, it wasn't played in the game, but it was a very interesting possibility. Black would hardly be happy to capture the pawn on g4, as in return for that little investment, white is going to get a whole file for this rook. So imagine the rook on d1 on the previous move, it wasn't doing anything, right? It was just attacking his own bishop. Now all of a sudden it is coming on a freshly open file. It is attacking the bishop, but it is also attacking the pawn and the king. Too many things for one file. And then after the capture and queen takes f3, white has serious threats. He wants to capture on h6. And if the king tries to run, the pawn on f7 would be hanging. While if black tries to defend with a move like queen d7, white can easily mount pressure on this bishop, force it to move away. And then we see the same problem. The pawn on h6 is hanging, because this one is pinned, the one on g7. And if black tries to stop this threat with king h7, in fact, he is not stopping it at all. White can still capture on h6, thanks to this massive support that he has from his heavy pieces. And this is actually close to a checkmate. In fact, if they capture it with the king, it's a nice checkmate after queen g2. Now give me queen takes g7. Checkmate. They have to defend this one with rook g8, but then check, and that's a beauty. F takes g6, and the two rooks have two open files, and on the two open files, this is enormous attacking potential, and this is checkmate. In that line, instead of capturing on h6 with the king, black could have taken with the pawn, but nevertheless there will be huge trouble on the g file after the move queen to g3. The threat is queen g7 checkmate, and this is pretty much unstoppable threat. The only thing I can see is to defend it with the queen, but then we have this check, we can use the h file, and we can use the f file too, and at the end of the day, this is going to be checkmate. In all these lines, white is using the open files, and this is the thing that you need to try and to look for whenever you're having opposite castlings. Try to open files as quick as possible, try to bring your major attacking pieces in action. The rooks and the queen. Okay, rook g1 is designed for opening files anyway, and Wei Yi goes g4. After that, he wants to play g5. And if the g file is opened, we have seen what happens after that. For example, if knight d4, capture, capture, and g5, that would be pretty similar to the line that we have just seen. David Navarra, however, was hoping that he can seal the king side with the move f6. And now indeed it looks like everything is very, very solid. Just like the white pawns are not going anywhere. If the white pawns are not going anywhere, then the rooks are going to remain passive. They are not going to have open files, and they'll be pretty much toothless. However, Wei Yi has seen far beyond that, because he played the fantastic move g5. He is trying to open the files and to bring his rooks into the attack at any cost, even at the cost not of a pawn. but even at the cost of a piece. Knight takes g5 was played now, and okay, black is pretty much forced to do something. If he captures immediately, though, there'll be bishop takes g5. The bishop is coming into the action with the tempo. And if the queen now moves, or if black doesn't defend with tempos, there'll be bishop f6, give me g7. Look how quickly the white pieces started attacking the opponent's king. The pawn on g7 is hanging, bishop f8, and now h6 is pretty much game over, as black cannot defend everything. The g7 square collapses. This will open another file for the rook, and this one will also get into the action. The queen, the bishop, the pawn. This is something that black cannot hold. On the other hand, if he tries to defend with a move like knight d4, this queen is just going to e3. This is going to be very similar to the game. And finally, if the bishop goes to e7, then the easiest way for white is to capture on e7, and then to attack on g7 and on g5 to bring one more piece into the action. Give me the pawn on g5. If black defends with g4, which is probably the best defense for him, there would be knight e3. This pawn alone cannot survive, that's quite obvious, so white is going to capture it. And then he is opening the road for his rooks, his queens. Okay, black did a lot to defend himself. He managed to trade a pair of light pieces, but in the process he lost one pawn, plus it's not over, the attack is not over. White can go rook g7, and he wants to open the h file now for his pieces. For example, if rook takes g7, check, and on the open files, white is either delivering checkmate or he is taking plenty of material, say king f8, check, check, and the easiest is to take the queen and then to capture the rook as well. That's a typical line. When you're opening so many files for your pieces, you can easily shift them from the queen side to the king side, then back to the queen side, the opponent's one. And your general idea is to try and to infiltrate with them into the opponent's camp. Okay, David Navarra decided to use the knight into the defense with knight d4. The queen went back to d1, he took on g5, and after bishop g5. Once again, I just want to mention that queen d7 is losing quickly because of bishop f6 and h6. We have seen this idea. If the pawn goes forward, we can capture it, we can win in 1,000 ways, but the easiest is h7. And black has to part with his queen, which is not going to save him from losing the game, obviously. Okay, so then bishop e7 was played, and now another fantastic move by white. Instead of capturing, or instead of going h6, he steps back. A very difficult move, actually, when you're attacking, because normally we are taught to look forward, just to go with everything that we have against the opponent's king. But if we think logically we will see that the king is actually in trouble after this move, as the g file has been opened. We are not stepping back, we are opening the road for the rook. This is the thing. Now, if black doesn't defend g7, if he goes bishop d6, there will be no supporters of g7, g7 would be lost, and that would be it. While after bishop f6 and h6, it becomes obvious that the black king cannot survive. For example, if g5, the beautiful line runs bishop takes g5, and after bishop g5, f4 to defend against the check with the tempo, e takes f4, queen h5, and black is pretty much helpless. Say, if the knight comes on e2, he can win the rook on g1, but who cares about the rook when there is checkmate in 2 on the g file? Or, if instead of knight e2, if he tries in this situation after queen h5, the move knight e6 to cover g7, then the problem would be h7 check, and if the king blocks it, there'll be knight e5, and unblocking is following next with this check or that check, and the pawn is going to h8. While if he goes king to g7, I like this line, it's a very beautiful one. And again, on the open files, check. It's possible only because of the pin on the g file. And knight e5, silent move, after which black is doomed. Knight f7 checkmate is coming, or knight g6, and if he captures the queen, check. And checkmate. The two rooks are nicely awarded for their efforts having the open files. And let's see what actually happened in the game. On h6 he tried rook e7 to defend everything on g7, but then capture. Now we have both the open files, and black is defending with his two remaining pieces. If you didn't notice, these things, these extra things on the queen side didn't take a single moment to help their king. They were too far away from the action. They couldn't bother this king, they couldn't help their own king. And this is the tragedy when you have opposite castling. Usually those pieces are useful. Then the game ended bishop e6, bishop h6, which is the simplest win. I just want to mention that there was another forced solution on the open file, check, check, and then knight e5 check. And after this, the rook is coming, infiltrating, and then the threats are too many. To start with, bishop d4 is the obvious one, and queen e6, but also rook h7 is a very powerful one, and black is completely helpless. But okay, don't worry, bishop h6 is good enough, and Wei obviously calculated everything to the end. On bishop f7, he took on g7. Then again, the open files are used for this covered check. This queen is gone away, and after this check and knight takes g1, white simply took on c7. Two light pieces are hanging. He is already up a couple of pawns. He is going to take a piece, and this is pretty much everything from that game. A very nice achievement by Wei Yi. But what I wanted to remember from this game is, first of all, never create hooks in your position. Never push the pawns on the side where you are weaker. h6 made it easier for white to open files. Also, remember the importance of the time. The one who starts the attack first is usually the one to win the game and to deliver checkmate. Next, try to open files at any cost, because a rook in the attack, 5 pawns in the attack, is enormous attacking power. And even at the price of a piece, you can open files. Just remember it. If you're using your heavy pieces properly, you're going to win the game. Thank you for your attention. See you next time.